All right, for today's lesson, we're going to go over histograms and shape of data distributions, which is a way for us to kind of organize information and look at it in a different way. Let's get started. So a histogram is also usually known as a bar graph. It displays the frequency of data within an equally sized interval. That's kind of important, that equally sized interval. It means that the distance from our values here is always going to be the same. And we need that to be consistent, otherwise our data would be skewed and things wouldn't exactly represent what we want it to. When we're setting up our graph, we also want to make sure we are labeling our axes. So we have our x-axis and our y-axis, which means the number of pounds is going to be down here. And your frequency is going to be your y value. All right, we should also label our axes so we know where our scale is. For x values, we're going from 1 all the way to 60, so we got to take that into consideration when we're labeling our axis. And then for our y values, we go all the way up to 34 as our max. So again, we want to consider that when we're making our intervals as well. All right, so to fit everything on our graph here, from my x-axis, you can see I'm basically going by fives, even though I didn't label it. So we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, and so on. And then for my y-axis, every 3 is 10. So we have 10, 20, 30, 40. All right, let's go ahead and now organize our information into a bar graph or a histogram. So for my interval, I know my x values between 1 and 10 have a frequency of 7. I'm going to make my bar graph to demonstrate that. So I'm going to go up to 7, which I'm going to estimate it's going to be about here, and that's between 1 and 10. And just kind of fill it in. And that's my bar graph for that portion. For the next portion, again, we have 11 through 20 is 8. So I'm going to go from 11 to 20 up to about 8, which is a little bit taller. And then we have 21 to 30 is going to be up to 10. And again, a little bit taller. For 31 to 40 goes up to 16. And that's going to be kind of right in the middle here. (41 to 50 is up to 34. Again, kind of in the middle of that area. And then finally, 51 to 60 is 15. Now that we have our data, we could ask a couple questions about it. For example, what if we were to ask about the distribution? Is it skewed one way or the other? We can see that we have kind of a flat portion over on the right, or sorry, on the left side over here. So it's skewed more to the left. If I ask you something about like the mode, what's the most frequently occurring? We can see from our table that the interval 41 to 50 has our highest frequency. We can also see from the histogram that it has your highest column, which would make that your mode value as well. And we would just say the modal values is 41 to 50. All right, for our next example, we have a table that shows the last 24 ATM withdrawals at a bank. AJ wants to display the data in a histogram using 7 intervals beginning with 26 to 50. All right, so what we're looking at now is the raw data, each individual withdrawal. So the 120 tells me that there was a withdrawal of $120. The 50 down here would tell me that there was a withdrawal of $50. So each one of those numbers is an individual withdrawal. We are asked to organize the information in a histogram. In order to do that, we want to kind of make our table. And for our table, we're going to be using 7 intervals. And the first interval is going to be from 26 to 50. Now that first interval is very important because it helps us set up the distance for each one of our future intervals. And if I just kind of do 50 minus 26, I get 24. So I know the distance between each one of my values is going to be 24. Okay, now what does that mean? Well, let's go ahead and look at setting up the future intervals. So I have 26 to 50 as my first one. For my next interval, we'll start at 51, and the gap between 51 and the end of the interval has to be 24, just like it was for our first interval. So if I add 24 to that, then I get 75. For our next interval, we're going to start at 76. Again, we're going to add 24, and I get 100. All right, go ahead and see if you can set up the rest of the intervals. We're going to keep going until we get to our last value, which is 200. So again, go ahead and hit pause now and see if you can set up the rest of the intervals and then check back in and see how you did. All right, so our remaining intervals that we need to set up were 101 to 125, 126 to 150, 151 to 175, and lastly 176 to 200. And again, I knew to stop at that last interval because my last number, or my highest number, my maximum is 200, and I don't need to keep going past that. All right, now what we're gonna do is organize our information in terms of tallies or frequencies. So we need to figure out how many numbers are there between 26 and 50. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross off the numbers as I go through them if they fall within that range. So 30 falls in that range, 40 falls in that range, 50 does, this 40 does, this 50, this 50, this 30, and I believe that's all of them. So that's a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so my frequency for that interval is going to be 7. If I continue on looking at my next interval, 51 to 75, I have, I have this 60, this 60, this 70, this 60, 70, and I believe that's all of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, guys, go ahead and pause the video and see if you can finish setting up the frequencies of the rest of our intervals, and then check back in and see how you did. All right, so hopefully we all have the same values here. As we go through it for my intervals, I saw there were, again, 7 numbers that were between 26 and 50, or I guess from 26 to 50. There were 5 numbers that were from 51 to 75, 5 numbers from 76 to 100, 3 numbers from 101 to 125, 2 numbers from 126 to 150, 1 number from 151 to 175, and 1 number from 176 to 200. Okay, so now that we have our intervals and our frequencies, we can go ahead and create our histogram. Again, we want to label our axes and then label our scale. So for our axes, we want to know what our x and our y values were. The x value is going to be what we're actually talking about, which is the amount of the withdrawal. So I'm going to put that down below. And then for our y value, it's going to be the same as it was for the last example. It's going to be the frequency. I'm just going to abbreviate that with frequency. Okay, for our axes, for our scale, I know for my x values, I'm going from 26 to 200, so I got to factor that in. And then for my y values, I'm going from 0 to 7, 7 being the highest frequency. All right, so go ahead and set up your scale, and then check back in, and we'll see how yours compares with mine. All right, so you can see here I did go by 25s for my x-axis. I just didn't label every value. So 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, and so on. And then for my y-axis, I went by ones. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to set up our histogram. So if you look back at our frequencies, I know that from 26 to 50, I have a frequency of 7, and my column is going to represent that. So again, from 26 to 50, I'm going to go all the way up to 7. And I like to fill these in. You don't necessarily have to, but it kind of makes it stand out a little bit more for me. For my next interval, from 51 to 75, the frequency is 5. So I'm going to have my column go all the way up to 5. And again, I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. All right, continuing our pattern, from 76 to 100, we can see that our frequency was 5 for that one. So my column is going to be similar. I'm going to make sure I do a different color so I don't kind of make these blend together. I know they're different things. All right, I'd like for you to go ahead and finish filling out the next 4 columns and then check back in and see how you did. All right, so hopefully our graphs look similar. Again, we can ask some questions from this, like what was the most frequent? We can look at things like range. We can talk about anything like an outlier, which I don't exactly see here. But we can use it again to answer questions. We have one specific question here we're asked. It says, the bank charges a fee for any ATM withdrawal less than $150. What can you conclude about the data? Well, that's pretty much most of our data here. So less than 150 would be all of this portion, which means that this person generally would get a fee when they would be withdrawing $150 or less. Because you can see they only took out more than that one time. So this person generally gets a lot of fees. All right, that's it for our notes. Go ahead and use this to help you complete the homework, and I'll see you next time.